wind bit cold through the port town of Halifax as Thomas Peters stepped onto the creaking deck of the Atlantic, a British merchant vessel preparing to sail for London. Clutched beneath his coat were sealed petitions, inked with the names of over 200 black loyalist families, men and women who had fought, fled, and labored for the British crown in the American Revolution, only to be abandoned in the frozen margins of the Canadian province of Nova Scotia. They had been promised land, promised freedom. Instead, they starved through winters in broken settlements, their children barefoot in the snow, living proof that the empire had lied. Peters, a once enslaved black man and now a war veteran and community leader, was done waiting. He wasn't heading to London to ask. He was going to demand, to look British officials in the eye and hold them accountable for a broken promise. He carried no title, no fortune, only the full weight of his people's betrayal and their last hope. In that moment, swaying with the ship's rise and fall, Thomas Peters may have been the most dangerous man in the Atlantic. You may not have heard his name, but you should have. Thomas Peters was born an African prince, stolen into slavery, and shipped across an ocean in chains. Decades later, he would stand before the British government itself, not as property, but as a leader, an ex-slave who would somehow lead the largest exodus of black loyalists from the icy margins of Canada to the coast of West Africa, laying the foundations of what would become Sierra Leone. How he did all of this in his time is a story hidden from public memory for decades, but once you know it, you won't forget it. This is his story, the journey of a founding father they didn't want you to remember. At Black Journals, we document what history tried to erase. Subscribe if you're here for the raw, unfiltered, and undeniably excellent history of our people. Now let's begin the trail Thomas Peters carved through war, exile, and empire. Thomas Peters was born around 1738 in what is now Nigeria to a royal family of the Yoruba people. As a young man of the Egba clan, he was educated, respected, and raised with the privileges of nobility. As a boy, he trained with a bow and spear, yet the rising trade in enslaved people made no exceptions. African royalty could be sold into bondage just like anyone else. When Thomas was about 22 years old, slave traders kidnapped him, chained him to a ship, and sent him across the Atlantic to the Americas. That ship, the Henri IV, landed him in French Louisiana. At that unfortunate moment, a prince was reduced to mere cargo. He was given a new name, Thomas Peters, by the slave traders. He arrived in a strange and brutal world, still clutching the memory of a home he would never see again. He was of the Egba people, a branch of the Yoruba, known for trading and skill at arms. As a boy, he had trained with bow and spear, but no hunter's skill could save him when slavers attacked. In that moment, all the privileges of his birth became irrelevant. They took his name, but not his memory, and so he carried his pride silently, like a hidden blade. In Louisiana, Thomas refused to accept life as a slave. Each time he ran away from his new masters, the plantation authorities met him with cruelty. After one escape, he was severely whipped. After a second, they branded him with a hot iron. After a third attempt, they chained him in heavy leg irons so he could barely walk. They hoped this torture would break his will, but it only steeled his resolve. Working in Campbell's mill, Peters kept one eye on the wheel and one on the woods outside. Every turn of the mill was a reminder of time passing under another man's control. His body toiled, but his mind was far away, mapping escape routes in the forest beyond. Eventually, he was sold again, this time to a Scotsman named William Campbell in Wilmington, North Carolina. Campbell put Peters to work as a millwright, a skilled mechanic who repaired the mill's grinding grain. In Campbell's service, Peters learned new trades and even married a woman named Sally. They had a daughter named Clary in 1771, and later a son named John in 1781. But even as the small family struggled to survive in the South, Thomas never forgot he was born free, and so he kept watching and waiting for any chance to escape. As Thomas struggled on Campbell's plantation, the British Empire and the American colonies were drifting toward war. By 1775, tensions were boiling over. Colonists were fed up with heavy taxes and rule from faraway London. They grumbled about King George and started to rebel. For enslaved black people like Thomas Peters, Revolution meant turmoil, but also opportunity. Rumors spread along southern plantations that the British might recruit slaves into their army. Those rumors proved true. In late 1775, Lord Dunmore, the British governor of Virginia, issued a proclamation offering freedom to any enslaved person who ran away and joined the British Army. For Thomas Peters, who had nothing but an ocean of grief between himself and freedom, this was like a spark in the darkness. For a man like Thomas, with nothing to lose, this was a chance at equality. Perhaps a faint hope, but a hope nonetheless. It was a risky gamble. Thomas and Sally knew the Americans might catch them, or they might drown trying to reach the British ships. Yet in the darkness of that February night, all other fears vanished, except one, the fear of remaining enslaved forever. In February 1776, that opportunity came. A British fleet sailed up North Carolina's Cape Fear River and bombarded Wilmington, scattering the Patriot militia. Panic seized the town. Thomas Peters, Sally, and little Clary snuck aboard a small boat and rowed out to the massive warships anchored offshore. Under the roar of British cannons, they escaped the only master they had ever known. Thomas was now free, in a sense, but still in the middle of a raging war. The Royal Navy and Army took the Peters family to New York City, where the British had built a base. There, he enlisted in the British Army's Black Pioneers, a unit of African Americans and freed slaves. They wore simple uniforms and served as soldiers and engineers, cutting wood, building fortifications, and transporting cannon. Thomas took a loyalty oath to King George, expecting to be treated like any other soldier. He took that oath, holding no weapon but his word, promising to serve without compulsion. The British promised that black loyalists would get the same pay and provisions as white soldiers. In practice, Peters earned 1 shilling a day, exactly what a white sergeant earned, just as he had been told. He and his comrades did backbreaking work under fire. By all accounts, he served with unwavering courage and intelligence. Every log he sawed, every cannon he hauled, was done with a purpose deeper than loyalty to Britain. Peters's purpose was freedom for his people. He and his comrades often moved under enemy fire, clearing paths or burying the dead. Twice he was wounded by American gunfire, but each time he recovered and returned to duty. His skill and bravery were undeniable. By war's end, he had risen to the rank of sergeant. His military service earned him a certificate of freedom, allowing him to leave New York as a free man. In 1783, the war finally ended. The American rebels had won independence. White loyalists rejoiced at news of new farms and trade under British protection in Canada, while patriot slaveholders tightened their grip on those they still held. The British, despite losing the war, honored their agreement with those who had fought for them. They evacuated about 3,000 black loyalists from New York, sending them north to Nova Scotia. In November 1783, Thomas Peters and his family were among them. They set sail for what they thought would be a better life in British North America. The ship was tossed by winter storms and had to stop in Bermuda for months. Finally, in May 1784, they landed at Annapolis Royal, Nova Scotia, with passports attesting that they were now free people. Thomas might have thought the worst was behind him. He had a document in hand that called him freeborn for his faithful service. But as the Peters family stepped onto the dock, the cold wind and gray sky were only hints of the harsh life to come. They had served their time. They expected land and provisions as the British had promised. What they found instead was a bitter new struggle, one of faith and survival rather than bullets. Thomas may have stepped onto Canadian soil expecting to be met with smiles and open fields. Instead, he saw endless pine forests and a biting cold no one had warned them about. In those first weeks at Annapolis, he realized that freedom meant something very different here. Instead of a peaceful haven, Nova Scotia offered a bitter reward. Government officials had pledged each loyalist new land and a year's worth of food to start their farms. White loyalists largely got those deals, fields of timber, barns stocked with food. Black loyalists got something very different. Thomas was asked to settle 200 former black pioneer soldiers in a village called Brindleytown in Digby County. The settlers built wooden huts on rocky ground by the Bay of Fundy. They planted cabbage and turnips and fished when they could, but it was still a fight. He had planned for one winter of snow and ice, building a cabin out of logs, and praying that spring would come. Instead, winter after winter dragged on and on. In Brindley Town, women learned to fish in the cold bay and men to milk the only goats brought along. Sally tried to grow a little garden, yet each morning, as Thomas saw the frozen ground, he remembered the warm earth of home and wondered if freedom would ever feel warm to him. It was supposed to be 3 years of rations, but records show the black loyalists in Annapolis County received only enough supplies to last 80 days. After that, the women had to beg for food. When snow came, there was little wood for heating. In one winter, some children starved until neighbors, or visiting sailors, shared scraps. Every empty granary and barren field was a daily reminder of that broken promise. Racism turned the situation into outrage. Some white Nova Scotians openly resented the black settlers. Some went so far as to burn down black cabins and crops. There were reports of loyalists torching black loyalists' homes and of unscrupulous men selling freed black settlers southward in secret. In the meantime, Thomas Peters and other black men were often forced into hard labor just to get food. Governor John Parr even introduced road work details. Black men were told they must break rocks on the public roads as payment for their rations. Imagine being a veteran sergeant who had fought for the king and now being put to the labor no white veteran had to do. Parr once grandly spoke of equality in Nova Scotia, and then, just publicly, turned away and addressed only the white settlers in the front rows, ignoring the blacks behind. Thomas saw all this as a betrayal of everything he had earned. He began calling out the hypocrisy. The British Empire claimed to reward loyalty, but here it was punishing those who had given everything. But Thomas Peters refused to let his people be forgotten. He and his friend Murphy Steele compiled petition after petition, demanding justice. In August 1784, Peters walked straight into Governor Parr's office and delivered a petition on behalf of the black loyalists. He wrote that he was unprovided with lands and begged for something to be done because his people were suffering. They repeated their pleas 2 years later when food ran out. None of those petitions brought the promised relief. At best, the government let them have tiny town lots for gardens and a schoolroom, but no farmland for families to live on. Thomas and Murphy Steele did succeed in getting 1-acre plots drawn up for 76 black families at Brindley Town, but this was hardly enough to farm. When Peters tried to claim more land for crops, other settlers disputed the titles. He had 2 small garden plots repossessed by surveyors. Each defeat only fueled his anger. He started preaching to his community that they had been deceived. The Crown had promised the same rights as to whites, but they had been tricked. Peters even printed some petitions neatly on parchment and marched with them to the governor's palace, trying to rally support. Yet the answers were always polite refusals or empty promises. Still, Peters persisted. He typed petition after petition himself, appealing to justice and reminding everyone of the British king's word. In one petition to King George, Peters wrote with fiery passion,
"My lords, we beseech you to remember the promise of your majesty, made in our behalf."
This handwritten plea traveled thousands of miles and was read by abolitionists in London. As the years passed, despair grew among the black loyalists. Children cried in hunger while nearby farms prospered. Some men sold themselves into servitude again, just for a bowl of food. Others slipped back into the newly independent United States, hoping to find any bit of relief, trading one oppression for another. By 1790, the situation was desperate. Thomas Peters stood before his community and made a fateful announcement. He would sail to London to petition the king himself. He had been deputized by over 200 black families, authorized to speak on their behalf. He prepared for the hazardous journey with nothing to carry but petition papers and his unshakable will. On deck, he watched the cold coastline of Nova Scotia fade and prayed that this desperate act would bring his people justice. He left behind his wife and children with only the king's word. Sally and the children stayed in Nova Scotia, their future unsure. Peters carried a small locket with their hair inside, pressing it each night and praying the king would hear his pleas. In the summer of 1790, Thomas Peters set off alone for England. It was a journey without guarantee of return. But in London, he found allies. He met Granville Sharp and other abolitionists who had been trying for years to end slavery's grip on the empire. Sharp and others were struck by his determination. Peters arranged meetings with high officials and even foreign ministers. He delivered petition after petition describing how black loyalists in Nova Scotia had been betrayed. He told them how his people had risked life and limb for Britain, only to be given rocks and icy fields. He pointed out that black men in Canada had no vote, no jury rights, and often no chance to even own property. One of his petitions declared that black loyalists were ready and willing to go wherever the wisdom of government may think proper to provide for them as free subjects of the British Empire. This line caught the attention of many reformers. Thomas Peters had taken the direct route to power in London. He was seen in the corridors of Whitehall arguing for his people, and his words spread quickly. It is said he pored over maps of Africa by lamplight, imagining the new coast where he hoped to see his children set free. In 1791, Britain approved the creation of the Sierra Leone Company to manage a new settlement in West Africa. Its plan was to create a colony for freed slaves, supplied by Britain's resources. To Thomas Peters, this sounded like a chance for redemption. He helped shape the plan, insisting that the settlers from Nova Scotia be given farmland and the rights they had been promised. Peters became an ambassador for the idea. News of the project spread quickly through the black communities of Canada. Thomas found that they too were eager to return to Africa if it meant freedom and land. He worked with naval officer John Clarkson, who was Granville Sharp's assistant on the scheme, to explain the plan. They advertised in churches and community halls. Sierra Leone would be their chance for equality. Hundreds of black loyalists volunteered. Meanwhile, white colonists in Canada bristled at the idea of losing labor. Some politicians ran newspaper stories and rumors suggesting Thomas Peters was being paid by the Crown to empty Nova Scotia of black people. But none of the skepticism dampened the resolute hope of the black loyalists. Thomas Peters returned to Nova Scotia in the fall of 1791 as a hero to his community. He organized church meetings in Halifax, Annapolis, Shelburne, and elsewhere, stirring the hopes of hundreds. "We will have land of our own," he told them, "and govern ourselves as free people." Across the province, black loyalists prepared to uproot their lives. White colonists, however, reacted with anger and suspicion. Despite the hostility, Peters pressed on. In December 1791, he and his supporters arranged a final Christmas feast in Birchtown, gathering all the black families for beef and rum, the last high meal they would share in Nova Scotia. Many later called it their farewell dinner to North America. In January 1792, a fleet of 15 ships left Halifax, carrying almost 1,200 black settlers toward West Africa. Thomas Peters sailed on one of the lead ships. He had made sure supplies were loaded and helped organize the spaces. Some nights Peters stood on deck under the stars, praying in his native Yoruba for a safe journey. The crossing was brutal. Storms battered the ships. Disease spread through the crowded holds. Many fell ill. During the 3-month journey, about 70 passengers died at sea. Thomas often stood at dawn and sunset, saying silent prayers over the endless ocean. Finally, in early March, with weary eyes, he spotted a tropical coast on the horizon. After nearly 3 months at sea, the expedition dropped anchor in a bay of Sierra Leone on March 9, 1792. The settlers had arrived at last. Thomas Peters stepped onto African soil for the first time in 30 years. Some in the party fell to their knees and wept at the sight of palm trees, ebony green and dense. He sent word back to the Sierra Leone Company. The colony had been settled. They were entirely satisfied with the place and the climate. For the first time since childhood, his dream of returning to Africa seemed within reach. The settlers started clearing land and building huts at a place they called Freetown. Thomas Peters felt a surge of hope as he watched the first cabins rise. This new town was nothing like Nova Scotia. It was hot, alive with the sounds of birds, a sharp contrast to the silence of snow. They raised a flag and sang hymns, but it wasn't long before the promise of Sierra Leone ran into reality. Life in the new colony was grim. The Sierra Leone Company had planned to let the settlers govern themselves, but instead they installed British officials. John Clarkson became superintendent with total control, and most of the appointed officers and soldiers were white men. Land that had been promised to the settlers was delayed or given to company favorites. The rainy season brought fevers that killed many. and food supplies ran low. Settlers toiled from dawn to dusk, building wells, planting cassava, fashioning basic schools and churches from mud and wood. Thomas Peters walked among them like a hopeful father, trusting that this time, finally, his people could lay down roots on land they would truly own. The first huts they built were flimsy, palm branches and grasses tightly bound over wooden frames. But they represented something more than shelter. They were the first homes of a free community. Conflict came to a head in spring 1792. At a meeting in Freetown's church, the settlers chose Peters to speak for them. He confronted Governor John Clarkson and demanded the promised land and equality. Clarkson, who had admired Peters, now saw him as a threat. In anger, he shouted and even pointed a pistol, declaring that one or the other would be hanged right there on the plaza. Peters remained calm and answered only that he spoke for the people's will. Suddenly, Clarkson ordered him arrested on trumped-up charges. Peters was put on trial, accused of stealing goods from a settler who had died of fever. The charge was likely false. Peters insisted he was innocent and that he had only been safeguarding money owed to him, but the court refused to listen. A jury with no black members found him guilty of want of discretion. He was forced to hand over the disputed items and stand in public shame to receive a reprimand. For the proud sergeant who had once built forts, this final humiliation broke him. Many of the settlers looked on in horror at this spectacle. It was as if a freedman's cause itself was on trial. Peters's calm before the trial only made him more of a hero in secret to the people he had led. He had been their voice. Seeing him humiliated wounded them deeply. Not long after the trial, Thomas Peters fell ill and could not recover. He was just 54 years old. Likely struck by malaria or typhus in the rainy season, he collapsed under fever. On the night of June 25, 1792, Thomas Peters died in Freetown, far from both the Nigerian homeland and the new land he had helped establish. The colonial officials treated him as a troublemaker, and so he died without honor or ceremony. In the words of historian James Walker, he died in dishonor, denied the respect of the people he had led. He left his family without him. His daughter Clary was still a child and would never see her father again. Thomas's own dreams died with him. However, his true legacy could not be erased. In the years that followed, his followers quietly preserved his memory. Some settlers even named their new neighborhoods and churches after the ideals he had championed. Stories were told of his courage. People began to tell tales about Peters as a way of remembering what he stood for. His real legacy was to inspire black people to demand justice and equality. So fortunately, his fight did not die with him. Thomas Peters is now remembered in Sierra Leone as one of the founding fathers of the nation. In Freetown, a statue stands beside St. George's Cathedral in his honor. Sierra Leone's government and schools teach about Peter as a hero who led his people to freedom. But for almost 2 centuries, his name was absent from history books in North America. America and Canada quietly skipped over his name. His biography appeared, if at all, only in specialized studies of the Loyalists and the colony. In contrast, Canada only recognized him as a person of national historic significance in 2022, finally acknowledging a Yoruba man who escaped enslavement in North Carolina to fight for the black loyalists' rights. Think of it. It took over 230 years for formal honor to come from the government he had served. In Sierra Leone, children grow up learning of Peters as a founding father, yet in schools, he was all but unknown for generations. That discrepancy is striking. A man who had been a loyal servant of the crown, who even petitioned the king in person, had to wait centuries for any recognition beyond a half-forgotten footnote. Thomas's journey from African royalty to enslavement, from soldier to nation builder, is quite extraordinary. He challenged the British Empire with a pen and an oath. He demanded equal rights when no one was listening. He organized a people almost single-handedly across oceans. He survived branding, gunshot wounds, and exile. He sailed from Nova Scotia to Africa, carrying only the hope he had kindled in others. Yet even in death, he was slandered and pushed aside. In Sierra Leone's history, a scholar observed that many later legends about Peters grew up to honor him, even if not literally true. Peters should be remembered not as a traitor, but as what he truly was, the courageous opponent of injustice, and a primary inspiration for Black self-determination. His dream was simple, that a man born in chains could one day stand as an equal citizen with land of his own. For that dream, he sacrificed everything. By telling his story, by learning his name, we honor not just one man, but countless others like him. Thomas Peters was right to demand better. It is now up to us to ensure he is no longer forgotten, that this founding father they didn't teach us about finally gets his place in history. History is richer and truer when we remember voices that were once silenced. Thomas Peters endured slavery and prejudice, yet he never stopped fighting for the rights of the oppressed. We celebrate figures like Washington or Jefferson, but how many know there were freed slaves fighting on their side? As the world begins to tell more complete histories, stories like Thomas Peters illustrate how much we have ignored. His life connects revolutions in America, Canada, and Africa, a global story that should not remain hidden. By learning his story, we honor the spirit of a man who dared to challenge injustice and build freedom for others. If this story sparks something within you, a new perspective, a deeper understanding, a sense of pride, give this video a like and leave a comment. Share your thoughts, your questions, or how this history made you feel. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more histories that were never supposed to be forgotten. This is Black Journals, where Black truth is not a footnote but the headline. See you in the next video.